I didn't approach it that way, for, as a woman thinking all she wants is a man. I don't know, I think you missed the first 15 minutes of the film. Her dream was to be a human. I want to be part of that world. Then she fell in love.
There's something about this movie that pulls on my heartstrings every time I watch it. And I'd be lying if I were to say that this is not one of my favorite movies, even as an adult in my 30s. Basically, every time I watch it, I end up crying at some point. And I've wondered, why does this impact me so much? Why do I regard this movie with such sacredness? Is it the sentimental score or the magical music? Is it the nostalgia? Well, yes and no. I saw lots of movies as a kid that didn't inspire any emotional response in me. And while this movie is often regarded at best as shallow children's entertainment and at worst a bad role model for girls, there has to be a reason other than just pure nostalgia that it has stayed with us for generations at this point. With it being the birth of the Disney Renaissance, it somehow captures the purest part of that era, and I would say it's probably the best Disney movie ever made. I'm not sure how popular of an opinion that would be, but there's something about the very first work of an era that really makes it great. But of course, I might be biased, but I think that I'm not the only one who would say that this is the first piece of media that truly spoke to the feminine soul of little girls around the world.
Our daughter was 3 years old. I think that was possibly the first film she really responded to.
Up until this point, we had seen a lot of epics and fantasies with male protagonists, but the female heroines were often masculine or hard to come by. This was the first time for many to see a heroine within her feminine qualities, but also getting next level agency, more than we had ever seen with any of the other Disney princess movies before. And this is also probably why I really don't want to watch the remake, although I might do it for criticism purposes. I haven't been able to bring myself to watch any more of the live-action remakes after seeing what they did. After watching Beauty and the Beast in theaters, I don't want to talk about it. Besides the fact that their live-action remakes are lifeless, drab, and sometimes nightmare fuel, they also often undermine the original identity of the film. So as Disney vomits out the next victim remake that they have sucked the soul out of, I want to revisit why The Little Mermaid was actually pretty great. There's been a lot of criticism of Disney princesses in recent years, especially in the 2010s era of pop culture feminism, and the criticisms that they made were just so stupid. There's even an article about how Keira Knightley won't let her daughter watch Cinderella because she wants her daughter to learn empowerment and to rescue herself and not depend on a man. But that's not even what the plot of Cinderella is.
She's banned from seeing certain children's movies, right?
Cinderella, banned, because, she waits around for a rich guy to rescue her. Don't rescue yourself, obviously. Little Mermaid. I mean, the songs are great, but do not give your voice up for a man. Hello?
I don't like that Ariel gives up her voice for the man in Little Mermaid, so I have a problem with Disney.
If you could be a Disney princess, who would you be?
Cinderella, because she worked for what she got. She wasn't some little hoe mermaid that married a guy when she was 16 that she never had a conversation with 3 days after meeting him.
Seriously, do these people even watch these movies? I love the implication of victim blaming here, as if we sometimes don't need help from other people.
Someone said to me once, Cinderella, she really needed a man in her life to get along. And I said, you're wrong. She wanted to go to the ball and have a good time. She wasn't going to marry the prince. She even left at midnight and left the prince.
And if you ask me, this is not feminism at all, but actually internalized misogyny, because we are taught to be very uncomfortable with our own feminine traits and our own femininity. And while I'm not going to say that these Disney films are completely unproblematic, especially in relation to their portrayal of people of color characters, nearly all of the Disney originals show a woman being in her feminine qualities, but also empowering her and showing her sense of agency. If you don't get that from the films, I think that you're not really actually watching them and processing them properly. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how Ariel is actually a feminist role model and how she didn't need to be fixed. And since I haven't seen the new remake yet, I'm not saying that they are trying to fix her and make her more feminist. I'm just saying it's just something I've seen in recent remakes lately, where it's just like they gotta make her like ultra powerful Mary Sues that don't have any struggles and lose all of their feminine qualities, and they're just like men in women's bodies. I think that that actually does away with the identity building quality that Disney princess movies had to millennial and Gen Z girls in the first place. In addition to proving that The Little Mermaid is not a damaging story about a love-obsessed girl who's looking for male validation, in fact, her story is quite literally the opposite message. I also want to extract the subconscious spiritual concepts and themes that have touched our feminine hearts so deeply as children, and show you, in fact, that more than a love story, this is a coming-of-age story. When watching the original movie, it becomes clear that Ariel's MO, or her main desire in life, is for freedom. She wants to explore a different world, something that is different than what she already knows. She feels like she doesn't belong in the world that she is, and she desires and longs to be a part of the world on shore. I mean, that's her whole what her whole theme song is about. She's passionate about her interests about human life, and she's kind of a nerd. Her interest in Eric originally starts because he's a human. He is a representation of the life that she desires. It would make sense that she would have an interest in him based off of that alone, but the movie makes it clear that he has more depth than just being a handsome human. He's humble, he also prioritizes adventure the same way Ariel does, and he's discriminating about who he wants as a spouse, and he's not letting anyone pressure him into making a life-changing decision that he doesn't want. Even in just these few lines of dialogue, they make it clear that he's waiting for something special, and he trusts his intuition to know when it's the right person for him. And Ariel, overhearing this conversation, inspires her enough that she would want to save a random stranger. Her immediate infatuation makes sense because these are attractive qualities, regardless of how attractive someone is physically. And him and Ariel are similar in the sense that they both are feeling a outward external pressure for a life that they don't want, and they are feeling their own internal will of trying to forge the life they do want for themselves. Unlike Ariel and her father, Eric and her share the same values. The irony, of course, being that even though Ariel is a mermaid and she should have more in common with her father, because of that, she actually has more in common with a human. This is a common trope in coming-of-age stories because this reflects what we go through during puberty. Part of growing up is individuating and separating from our families. This is why teenagers usually have a rebellious stage. They go through various phases to find the parts of themselves that they couldn't find within the realm of their own family. They need to form new relationships and gain new perspectives to find out who they truly are. Ariel's story starts right in the middle of the restlessness of adolescence, of wanting to individuate from her family because their values aren't hers, and she knows that she belongs somewhere else. And conversely, her father is opposing this, sensing her restlessness and desire to individuate into a different value than he holds. This can be extremely frightening and threatening to parents because you don't really know who your child is going to end up being on the other side of adolescence. Not only is this a time where you see if you failed as a parent, but it's also a time when parents experience the loss of identity of being a child's parent, because while they're always parents, they're never going to be a parent of a child again. They are forced to find their identity outside of parenthood for the first time in many years. This is a time when the differences between a parent and a child come to a head, and the child has to decide what values they hold and who they want to be. I know I'm not the only child who related to this line.
Only I could make him understand.
In fact, King Trident reminds me of the differences I've had with my own father, and seeing this movie as a child helped me understand that he loved me even if he just didn't understand. I think that a lot of children can relate to their fathers having these moments in their lives. Ariel! And it actually portrays the consequences of this very well, even for the parents. And this is what I love about this movie. This isn't just about Ariel's growth and even Eric's growth, which we will discuss later in the video essay, but this also is showing the growth of a father, an older man through having love for his daughter, learning to temper his own flaws. And Ariel, of course, is having none of it. And this is a much better representation of challenging the patriarchy and toxic masculinity. Most modern heroines are shown to beat men at their own game, when not only is that a unrealistic message, it's also kind of dangerous. Giving the message to young girls that if we just embrace our vagina power, that we can beat all the bad guys and be stronger than men, and we just have to believe in ourselves, when in reality, that would make us actually very vulnerable, because men typically are stronger than women. And that is a statistic and a reality that we can't get away from. Men still, to this day, have more financial, political, and physical power than most women. This is why scenes like this and scenes like this are so terrifying to the feminine nature. We know that men are stronger than us, and even the men that we are close to can turn on us and use their power against us. While something could be said to the normalization of violence against women in scenes like these, I also think there is a positive side as well, because it reminds girls that men are stronger than us. And the message that we're getting from modern heroines is that they aren't. This shows the consequences of toxic masculinity and shows how it can hurt what masculinity is meant to protect. Modern feminism actually doesn't hold men accountable. It says, you're going to be strong? Well, I can be stronger. You're going to be smart and use that power against me as a woman? Well, I can be smarter. While this might seem empowering on a shallow level, it actually isn't, because it continually undermines the responsibility, taking it from men and giving it to women, instead of holding men accountable for their actions.
Well, you shouldn't have been in the West Wing!
Well, you should learn to control your temper. By the way, thank you for saving my life.
And this movie does a brilliant job of showing the consequences of the toxic masculinity that King Triton has, and taking responsibility for them and rectifying his mistakes as a man should. In addition to the consequences of toxic masculinity, we also see the consequences of authoritarian parenting. This is classified in psychology as the extremely strict parenting that pushes a child too far, which historically has been proven in psychology alienates your children and causes them to act out. By not understanding your children and making room for their differences, instead of protecting them, you're actually making them more vulnerable to find direction and comfort in people who want to exploit or hurt them. King Triton is the very definition of the common experience of having a parent with good intentions who ends up falling short of effective parenting, and whose authoritarian discipline backfires. While Ursula's symbolic role, which I will discuss later in the essay, is the conflict between Ariel and Eric, her literal role has to do with the conflict between her and her father. Ursula is a representation of all the people out in the world who would want to hurt your child, and is the reason why parents like Triton are concerned in the first place. But because his bias is against humans, he fails to see the real threat, which is someone from his own set of values as being good people. This is also a setup for his transformation of his own values, which needed to be transformed through Ariel's exploration. On a spiritual level, children are meant to individuate so that they can correct the values that their parents hold that lie in falsehood rather than truth. The spiritual role of every succeeding generation is to transmute the negative values and to hold on to what was good within that family line. That is truly how you honor your parents. And part of that individuation has to do with experiencing other relationships outside of the family. And it's usually when we first experience the romantic relationship, which unsurprisingly is where this movie gets most of its criticisms.
You can't marry a man you just met. You can if it's true love.
You mean to tell me you got engaged to someone you just met that day? Didn't your parents ever warn you about strangers?
Hans is not a stranger.
Have you had a meal with him yet? What if you hate the way he eats? What if you hate the way he picks his nose?
Picks his nose?
And eats it.
In actuality, this movie subverts the criticisms that are often projected onto it. The love story in this movie and in other Disney princess movies is often painted as impulsive and infatuation rather than a representation of a true grounded love. But the story actually explores and portrays the difference between infatuation and love. Let me explain. Like I said before, when Ariel first encounters Eric, she doesn't just experience love at first sight, although one could argue she definitely experiences that. She also gets to know who he is as a person and what his values are. She sees and recognizes herself in him and that they share the same values, which is a very important part of the foundation of a true and grounded love, not one based on infatuation. And when Eric first becomes aware of Ariel, he experiences a love at first sight, or well, sound, as well too. What would you call that? Love at first heard? Hearing? I don't know. Now, before I get into how this movie introduces more depth to their love beyond that, I want to defend this love at first sight concept to a degree. It's my personal belief that the way that someone looks and sounds, especially their voice, really portrays who they are as a person on an energetic essence level. There have been philosophies that have linked appearance with not only personality but even character as well, which I definitely don't agree with. However, it is interesting to consider how much your appearance and your body language and even the sound of your voice portrays who you are as a person. For those of you who are into Myers-Briggs, there's even a visual typing technique that allows you to type people based off of appearance alone and body language. Intuitively, we all know that the way that someone appears and sounds and moves and the way that they interact with other people, it does represent a deeper essence of who they are. And of course, we know from an evolutionary perspective that the way that someone looks and sounds indicates health as well. But personally, I do believe that it goes deeper on a metaphysical level than just indications of health and fertility. I believe there's such a thing as soul recognition, being able to see another person and recognize their soul. You may have experienced this when you have met someone who you felt like you've known your entire life. One caveat that I should mention is that when you do feel this familiarity, sometimes it can be a psychological phenomenon where you're reminded of a familiar dynamic from your childhood. So I will say that and to be cautious of it because it's not always necessarily a good sign. However, I do believe there is a spiritual aspect to this as well, where you can recognize someone based off of something beyond psychology even, not even based on familiar dynamics, but simply just a recognition of soul. I won't get into this in this video, but maybe I'll do a video exploring the metaphysical reasons for that in a future video. But beyond their soul recognition, the recognition of themselves and each other, that kindred spirit feeling, this movie goes into how their relationship develops and progresses. And this is where we can really see the difference in the message between infatuation and love.
Far better than any dream girl is one of flesh and blood.
When Eric first hears Ariel's voice and sees that she has saved him, he becomes fixated on this. He kind of obsesses. Like I said earlier, I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing or an indication of infatuation alone. He trusts his intuition in recognizing the person that he wants to be with based off of the essence of her voice. Even though we can't deny that trusting yourself is a major theme in this film, probably even more so than the love aspect, we also can't deny that an infatuation is built off of his original hit of intuition. This is a common problem with finding our own internal truth, because intuition will always be a reflection of that truth. However, we can build illusions and infatuations around that hit of intuition, and it can confuse us from the true truth. It is common within mythology to see this spiritual battle within our heroes and heroines of finding the truth versus illusion. This is reflected to us in mythology so that we can find our own intuition and internal truth on our own spiritual path. That's the purpose of these movies, of mythology in the first place. And this is never more relevant to our personal lives than it is to the realm of love, choosing our romantic partners. When we are faced with that choice, that is when our discernment and our intuition is tested. This is part of why love is purifying. You can only find true love if your discernment is pure and your character is pure, because otherwise you will choose inauthenticity instead of authenticity. This becomes the major conflict for Eric, who is more than just a Disney prince who comes in and saves the princess. He is faced with a choice of his own. He has to choose whether or not he's going to follow the illusion of the infatuation that has been built around his original hit of intuition, or if he is truly in touch with his discernment and his ability to discern truth from falsehood, even if the truth is not what he expected. Or in other words, the world around him is reflecting a falsehood rather than his intuition. Is he going to trust what he sees, or is he going to trust what he feels? Well, Ariel never wavers in what she wants because she actually has a clearer view than Eric does. Interestingly enough, Ariel is actually more in her masculine. She sees what she wants and she goes after it. Eric is the one who is more in his feminine in this film because he has to go within to decide what the truth is. He has to trust his feminine intuition to show him what is the truth of his own soul. Who is his true love? And only he can know that by knowing himself. The danger of this illusion based on falsehood is actually personified in this film as Vanessa. This is the infatuation that he has built brought to life, this temptation to give into inauthenticity and shallowness. This is a great representation of the test men must face in love. The masculine test as the penetrative observing force must overcome its own internal weakness for beautiful things. Not that there's anything wrong with that attraction, of course. However, it also has to be backed up with the internal beauty. Many men often marry for looks and are stuck in marriages that are miserable because they never considered the inner beauty or character of the woman they marry. Neither do they have the spiritual discernment to recognize true compatibility with someone on more than just a physical level, but on a spiritual, emotional, and mental level as well. Dark femininity plays a very important role in providing this test to men to help them to overcome their own internal weakness. Eric wasn't objectifying Ariel at all, actually the opposite. He was falling in love with her despite the ideal he had in his head. He's letting go of the illusory idealism that is based in falsehood. Even in the difference in the way that she's presented with this glow around her face, almost making her look like this savior or this angel or this goddess, he's falling in love with Ariel as the real girl, not some goddess that he put up on a pedestal. And this is the profound message in this movie about the difference between infatuation and love. Love isn't about finding this perfect, idealized person. It's about loving someone despite their flaws, not because they're perfect. That's not love, that's like. Although it was that magical, sexy mermaid voice and her goddess-like quality that first attracted him to her, getting to know her in a real way, getting to know the real girl is what caused him to love her. Even with her having what you could call a disability. Both Eric and Ariel are the examples of the spiritually evolved hero and heroine. They don't let fate claim them like most people do. They recognize their power as creators and make their own destiny. Claiming what your soul wants, not what your ego wants, is actually the most spiritually evolved thing that you can do. We often see on this earth the exact opposite. People who claim and steal and take for the sake of their ego. But when you claim what your soul wants, you do it in a way that has integrity. On the flip side, the spiritually failing person is also someone who doesn't have the courage to take what their soul wants either, to make their destiny and to claim what is theirs. The difference between taking from the ego and claiming from the soul is within the ego, you're taking something that belongs to someone else, but within the soul, you're claiming what is yours. The first has no respect for human life, and the second has the utmost respect for human life and the utmost respect for free will, which is the root of how to operate within integrity. This courage of stepping into your own hero's journey and claiming what your soul wants is a reflection of the primordial energy of the existence of life. Life wanted to exist, and so it did. God claimed its desire by dividing it into duality, and we are also a reflection of Source claiming our own desires. And so the destiny of every human, whether or not they claim it, which few do, is to make heaven on earth. And I don't mean this in a religious or New Agey kind of way. I'm not talking about literal heaven on earth. I'm talking about what we create in our lives. having the courage to claim what's yours, what you desire on your deepest, most pure level of who you are. There's a reason why it's always a part of the hero or heroine's journey to rise out of the status quo, to become the spiritually, I guess you could say, elite. You have to hear the call of your own soul and to have the courage to go after what you really want. On a spiritual level, this is the most noble thing we can do, because by becoming masters of our own reality, we inspire others to also follow their own free will. Free will being the most sacred value in the universe, and the prerequisite for its most sacred fruit, love. And it's characters like Ariel that show us that women can be stereotypically feminine and still strong, powerful, and in control of their own lives, even if we are physically weaker than men. See, the way that femininity overcomes masculinity is not through beating them through their own game, being stronger than them or smarter than them or more powerful or more independent than them, but it's actually through the softness of our femininity that encourages them to step up and be who they're meant to be. And of course, there's an aspect of this that is standing within our own will and our own power against men. First, Ariel says no to King Triton. She says no to the patriarchy and to his toxic masculinity. And she does become independent. She's not subservient to him. She goes and finds her own way. And this challenges Triton to become a better man for his daughter. While the hero's journey, a pattern within mythology about the journey back to wholeness discovered by Joseph Campbell, is pretty straightforward, the heroine's journey is much more complicated. While the hero's journey is more concerned with outward success and masculine triumph, the heroine's journey incorporates more of the blend between the masculine and the feminine, while also prioritizing the subconscious healing and wholeness as well. What they both have in common is the masculine yang path of individuating from the yin masses and into the will, which is the initiator of the spiritual path. This is why Ariel is different from her previous Disney princesses thus far, even though those stories are completely valid within their own right when it comes to the female path as well. It is true, in order to break out of the patriarchy, we do have to meet masculinity with our own internal masculinity, our own will that says no. As women, we do have to buck the unreasonable expectations that men place on us, and we do also have to stand up to the patriarchy. The irony is that this trend of these stoic masculine female role models that someone like Keira Knightley might want her daughter to look up to are evidence of the misogyny that women have internalized. And ironically, this upholds the patriarchy instead of actually challenging it. This is simply the flip side of the subservient, victimized woman. The super powerful woman who has no room for her own femininity and emotional vulnerability is not an empowered woman. She is a woman who is still cruelly controlled and subjugated by her own inner man. This is wounded and insecure masculine energy that these women are stepping into. Masculinity that condemns and fears the feminine and therefore controls its expression. This isn't to say that women shouldn't be stepping into their masculine energy. They absolutely should. But they need to be stepping into their divine masculine energy. The energy that allows them to buck the patriarchy and go their own way. And this is exactly what Ariel does. Ariel listens to the call of her own soul and takes action based on that. She also listens to her own principles, her own inner will, and she saves Eric, even though it's something her father, who represents the patriarchy, wouldn't want her to do. She is in touch with her inner divine masculine, and it leads her to the physical representation of her divine masculine, which would be her divine counterpart. Carl Jung's theory of the anima and animus describes that every man has a feminine unconscious factor, and every woman has a masculine unconscious factor as well. This, in essence, is just a renaming of the ancient concept of yin and yang. Your relationship with your inner man as a woman and a man's relationship with his inner woman as a man impacts the relationships with the genders on the physical plane. In this story, we see that Ariel has a good relationship with her inner man, her animus. It is this purified internal will, this masculine side of herself that leads her to her destiny and manifests into the physical embodiment of her own inner divine masculine, her counterpart. I said earlier that Ursula represents not only an obstacle between her relationship with her and her father, but it also, of course, is an obstacle between her and her love interest. I'll probably go into this in a different video, but this is why having an overt villain is so important, because it's about what it represents. Not only does she move the plot forward, but her overt villainy represents the challenge that the hero and heroine have to overcome. It is this challenge, this test, that brings love to its fruition and also shows the contrasts of where love doesn't exist.
So much for true love!
King Triton is forced to take his daughter's place and thus shows that he truly loves her in an unconditional, sacrificial way. And after Ariel saves Eric twice, that's right, take that in your pet feminist pipe and smoke it, he saves her. He is finally stepping into his divine masculine role, the role that Ariel had manifested for him. It's very clear to see that these are two partners who are on the same level. No longer is she the subjugated feminine under the rule of a more powerful man. She is able to take her rightful place as an equal to her divine masculine. Meanwhile, her father, Triton, experiences what it is like to be powerless and subjugated, just like he is doing with his daughter and maybe even his subjects. What I also love about this movie is that it doesn't villainize men stuck in patterns of the patriarchy. It gives redemption to the patriarchal figure as he proves that he truly does love his daughter. This is a contrast to most female empowerment movies today that go to war with the patriarchy instead of recognizing it as a system that doesn't just harm women, but also harms the spiritual growth of men. And there are many men who are just as trapped as women and who also desire for their feminine side to be let free. And on a broader scale, Ursula and King Triton are two sides of the same patriarchal coin. Much like the modern female heroines that have internalized misogyny that I mentioned earlier, Ursula also is a representation of that internalized misogyny and toxic masculinity. Her hatred of King Triton is actually her hatred of the patriarchy, which of course is valid in its own right, but it's also a traumatized response to the patriarchy, which is something that I'm seeing a lot today in not only our villains, but our heroes as well, our heroines. It's clear to see that Ursula is convinced that losing the most captivating part of her, which is her mermaid siren voice, that he would never be able to fall in love with her truly. And this is why villains do such a good job of representing the human ego, which we must overcome if we are to ever experience true love. She is a fantastic foil for Ariel, who is also standing up against the patriarchy, but is doing so in a way that is not bitter and bent on revenge, by stepping to an integrity and refusing to objectify men in return. Knowing that there is a higher version of this masculinity that Ursula so hates, still believing in men's capability to be noble, and by doing so, creating the outcome that feminism so deeply desires. And Eric, in turn, being an embodiment of the divine masculine, steps into the role that Ariel has believed in. Eric destroying Ursula represents the killing of the ego of separation consciousness that prevents the merging into oneness and harmony and restoration from the wound of duality, with male and female once again reuniting to one. By Ariel saying no to the version of masculinity that subjugates her, and embracing a version of masculinity in Eric, the divine masculine that honors her, she's fulfilling her role in the spiritual female path. This not only restores women, it also restores men who have been rejecting their own inner femininity for centuries. You see, femininity has its own power too. I'm not trying to say in this essay that men are just strong and we will never be as strong as them. We have our own kind of strength. Our power is being the gatekeeper. The evolved feminine will only allow the most evolved masculine to guide her. And that first starts within her own self, her own divine masculine that is a part of her. And when, as women, we master that and we allow our own inner divine masculine to protect us and to guide us, we will also manifest a physical version of that in our partner. Prince Eric represents what we can have as feminines if we allow our divine masculine to guide and honor us. And in a broader sense, Prince Eric represents the new masculine paradigm, which honors true masculinity by refining it to its most evolved and destined state, which Ariel knew all along that she was destined to have, and we can have it too. to live life in the shining sun of the awakened masculine consciousness and out of the lower and more dense patriarchal waters. Triton finally recognizes this evolution and approves of the new paradigm, the paradigm of feminine equality and honoring of the feminine rather than the suppression and subjugation of it. The masculine and feminine is restored to its equal and balanced state. And the evolution of this path, the coming together of the masculine and feminine into love, also restores everyone around us. This is how we become leaders to others. So as you can see, in addition to the sneakily powerful lesson about the true nature of love, not just with her and Eric, but with her and her father, this is also a female empowerment story done right. This is a story about growing up, about a young girl searching for identity and just happens to fall in love in the process, which is often part of growing up. It's about making peace with the restlessness and angst of adolescence, where we can tend to see our parents as obstacles of our self-development and happiness, and transitioning from adolescence into adulthood, where we see them in a more mature light, recognizing that they're just doing their best to love and protect you with what they know, even if they can't always understand you. It's about a parent coping with empty nest syndrome and recognizing that profound love allows you to let go. The ending and the most sentimental part of the film isn't even about their romance. And there's a reason that this is the last line in the movie, and also the part that makes me cry the most. The Little Mermaid isn't about changing yourself for a man. It's actually quite the opposite. It challenges the patriarchy, and it shows that girls can be what they want, no matter who tells them anything, even their father. This teaches us the power of the will, the power of manifestation, of deciding that you want something, and deciding that it is meant for you, and how you can actually truly change your own life. It's about finding who you are and bringing peace to your inner conflict by claiming your destiny. It's about a girl who knew herself and knew what she wanted. I don't know what could be more empowering than that.